Hi, good morning everyone, and thank you very much for the opportunity to come and present to you today. What's in store for you this morning? Well, I'm going to outline for you the initiative as a whole, the menu labelling initiative that was rolled out in New South Wales and subsequently has got very good national reach as well. I'll talk to you about the achievements that we've made within that initiative and, as requested, focus on some of the gaps and the opportunities that remain. As Joe has already pointed out, if you're going to address issues that relate to obesity and overweight in our nation, it does require a multifaceted approach. So it's very important to remember that providing nutrition information about fast food products at the point of sale is really only one step and one strategy in trying to encourage consumers to eat healthier foods. With respect to the Kilojoule menu labelling initiative, and to answer the question, is it working, we first of all have to ask, well, what was it intended to do in the first place? And what it was intended to do was to create standardised information, a standardised information system, nutrition information system, and to promote the consistency of the use of that system across those outlets that qualified. It was also the intention of the initiative to provide consumers with appropriate education so that they would be able to better interpret the information that they're being presented with and to put it into their own personal context. And in doing so, that's helping them to encourage to make a healthier food choice. The initiative is supported by legislation, and the legislation was introduced in New South Wales on the 1st of February 2011, and there was a 12-month implementation period for fast food and snack outlets. Supermarket chains are also affected, and they had until the 1st of February 2013 to comply. The basic requirements are to display standardised nutrition information, that's energy information, primarily specifying the type, the manner and the location of the information to be displayed. So who has to display this sort of information? Well, it's any food chain, including a supermarket that has greater than 20 locations in New South Wales or greater than equal to 50 nationally. The requirement is that they need to display the kilojoule content of standard food items. And quite importantly too, this sort of initiative has been rolled out in other countries or other cities, but what it has lacked overseas has been a reference point for the consumer. It's fine to be able to see how many kilojoules are in an item that you're going to purchase, but really what does that mean for me and my daily intake? So it's also a requirement that the statement, the average adult daily energy intake is 8,700 kilojoules, is displayed so that people have that reference point. Important too that it only applies to what's called standard food items, and so a standard food item is something that is standardised for size as well as for portion. Examples of the typical fast food outlets that needs to comply with this regulation are the quick service restaurants, the pizza, the coffee, the bakery, the ice cream, the donut, the beverage and the salad chains. One of the first achievements I'd like to talk about is implementation, and we believe this is an area where we had a great deal of success. And one of the reasons why it was successfully implemented is that we had very strong stakeholder engagement. When the regulation was passed by Parliament, we were already working with a stakeholder reference group which was comprised of representatives from government, from industry, from public health and as well as consumer groups. And that made a very big difference in terms of how well and how quickly businesses were able to respond to the legislation. All of the affected chains were offered one-on-one assistance to help make sure that they were able to implement in time and to comply. And it was very pleasing to see that we had 10 early adopters. So there were 10 chains, which equates to hundreds of businesses out there who had information available prior to that 1st of February timeline. And on the 1st of February 2012, 90% of the chains that were required to comply to the legislation had that information available. Of the few chains that didn't, they had that information up within the next 3 months. There was only one chain that had failed to do that. So I think that's a pretty good reflection of how responsive the industry were in implementing the legislation. We also found that there was a very high level of compliance to the detailed requirements that are in the legislation. And to do this, we did some on-site checks. We looked at 150 outlets across New South Wales in metropolitan as well as in regional areas, and across the 40 chains that need to comply with the legislation. We looked at their menu boards, the drive-through facilities, the display cabinets, the promotional materials, the online menus as well as the takeaway menus, and we did find that compliance was very good. That's not to say that it was absolutely perfect. There were some issues that were noted, but they weren't found to be systemic issues. In 1 or 2 of the outlets, we may have found some missing energy content on some of the items that were displayed, or we found some missing energy content on the posters that were available in the outlet, or the reference statement wasn't available. These issues were taken back to the head office and they were resolved very, very quickly, and an undertaking from the head office to get them fixed with the next menu change, or it was perhaps simply a case that the franchisee needed to just have a little bit more instruction about what they needed to offer on display and to ensure that they actually had the materials available so that they could display it. So from that respect, compliance was a very good achievement. Businesses were very responsive when there was an issue, and the issues that we had were quite minor. It's very understandable when you take a state-based approach, which this was at first from a legislative point of view, that many of the chains that we were working with, well indeed all of the chains, have got a very good spread. They work outside New South Wales. So understandably, industry wants to have the confidence to say, you know, what's going to happen if other states adopt this legislation? They want to know, is it going to be consistent? Can I confidently roll out this information across all of the stores nationally, or am I going to be faced with something different in Queensland or something different in WA, etc., etc.? To help give industry greater confidence in that respect, the ministers that are responsible for food regulation in Australia agreed that a national approach did need to be developed to ensure that consistency. And by mid-2011, there was a working group who had developed a set of nationally agreed principles, and these principles were to assist jurisdictions should they decide to introduce this point of sale nutrition information measures. And these principles were aligned completely with the legislation that had passed in New South Wales. And so this did give certain chains the confidence when they were to comply and roll out to meet the requirements in New South Wales, they did so nationally. So we're not only sending information out to businesses in New South Wales, consumers in New South Wales, but that information was going more broadly. And in fact, South Australia and the ACT has subsequently legislated. Consumer education was complementary to regulation, but it was also very integral to the success of the initiative. And the New South Wales Government provided around $1.2 million to support a consumer education campaign. Community and industry partners help shape and distribute the campaign messages under their own branding. The messages were also kept clear and consistent with national nutrition messages. You're familiar with, and Joe's already mentioned, as well as the Minister, the 8700 campaign, Find Your Ideal Figure, and this was launched in March 2012. And the purpose of it was to help consumers use the information that they were now seeing in these outlets, and to also help them use it in their own personal context, because 8700 is the average adult. Everyone has their ideal figure, hence the tagline for the campaign. And it was very important that people would learn and understand what is my ideal figure. And to do that, many tools were developed, including a dedicated website. We had interactive calculators so that people could derive their own daily energy intake. There was a smartphone app. We make use of Facebook. There was a searchable, and there still is, an interpretive fast food database. We had media ambassadors, and you can see Jeff Hugel, who is shown with the Premier, as well as the Minister for Primary Industries here, who were ambassadors for the campaign to help promote and raise awareness of it. Some paid advertising in food courts, very minimal radio advertising, and as well as advertising on some of the online search marketing like Facebook and mobile phones. We know that consumers were accessing the information, and the figures that I'm just about to give you are those that were achieved only 6 months after the campaign. These numbers have increased, but we had over 200,000 visits to that 8700 websites. There were 100,000 downloads of the app. There was 9,000 likes on Facebook, and we also had a small YouTube video to try to, again, put into context these purchases for an individual, and that had over 6,000 views. When we did ask consumers, and I'll talk a little bit later about some of our engagement with consumers, what they thought about the campaign material, overwhelmingly the feedback that we got was positive, and it was positive from the point of view that it's not material that are telling us what to eat. It's not telling us what is good food or what is bad food. It's providing us with information, and most importantly, it's allowing me to make a decision, and it's helping me and trying to guide me towards making a decision towards a healthier food choice. The achievement is that also this particular initiative was subject to an evaluation. And when the legislation was passed in December 2011, the New South Wales Food Authority, as well as the Ministry of Health, commenced to develop an evaluation framework for it. And again, we did this in collaboration with our stakeholder reference group. And what that evaluation aimed to do was, like most evaluation frameworks, is it gives you some targets in terms of what's working from the implementation side, as well as what are we doing with regard to impact. And many of the previous slides that I've just shown have addressed those issues with regard to implementation, making sure that businesses understand and that they comply. It is a legislative requirement, so our regulatory agencies appropriately managing and enforcing that regulation. Are consumers getting materials to help educate them and inform them in how to make best use of the information that they're seeing? And certainly that information is being made readily available to them. What I'd like to focus on now is to look at some of the impacts, and in particular, whether we had increased consumer awareness and understanding of energy, and whether consumers were purchasing fewer kilojoules. And I'll do this first by addressing the fast food and snack outlets, and then I'll come to supermarkets. When it comes to looking at knowledge and use and the nutrients purchased, we used a cross-sectional design, and we had 3 data collection points to measure changes that were pre and post implementation of the legislation. And this data collection was taken over a 12-month period by a market research company. We used a mixed method approach, which included face-to-face interviews with consumers as they exited a fast food outlet, and that's referred to as the Intercept survey on the slide in front of you. And we also did online surveys where we targeted the general population as well as a subpopulation within that, the 18 to 24-year-olds, which was the target group for the messaging for the 8700 campaign. So the general population survey was designed to give us an overall sense of population measures of what consumer awareness and understanding is like. We worked with minimum quotas set for gender, age and location, again recognising the need to include metropolitan as well as regional areas. We targeted for the general population 500 participants at each sampling, and the participants for the online surveys were recruited from an online research panel that had 300,000 active participants on it. The Intercept survey was also designed to provide us with information about knowledge and use, but importantly what it also enabled us to do is to collect information from consumers about what they had just consumed, so that we would be able to take that and convert it into the number of kilojoules that were purchased. On each occasion, we targeted to interview 800 people as they exited a fast food outlet. The survey was not designed to provide a population to be representative of the population, but rather it was random sampling of consumers as they left the site, and we were doing this on a particular day and at a particular time. We worked with 14 fast food outlets in New South Wales. It was a stratified sampling approach so that we could capture quite broadly locations and demographics. There was a mixture of outlets, again in regional as well as in metropolitan areas, and being mindful to include locations that are in low, medium and high socioeconomic profiles. The outlets were visited, and exactly the same ones on each of those 3 data collection periods, and people were recruited as random as they exited and after they had finished their meal. The additional survey that we did for the 18 to 24-year-olds, there was 200 participants in that. We did get some information with regard to knowledge and use, but primarily that was designed to give us feedback about the consumer education campaign because they were the target group for it. Now, there's quite a lot of information that we have available on the New South Wales Food Authority website about this research, and I do encourage you to go to that website and have a look at it. I'm not able to present all of it. I'm only able to present the highlights this morning, and I think the next few slides are also going to test your eyesight to some extent, so apologies for some of the fine print. I've tried where possible to highlight the key points. One of the areas I'd like to talk about is that we're interested in terms of what do consumers think when they hear the term kilojoules. What do they feel that it refers to? And around half of the general population and 70% of that 18 to 24-year-old age group were correctly giving the response that kilojoules related to a measure of energy, which was quite encouraging. This remained consistent throughout all of our sampling periods, so we didn't see a change in that. Other points is that around 1/5 of the general population and 1/10 of those 18 to 24-year-old surveys also made a reference to calorie content. That's what they thought that kilojoules meant. There's still a lot of uncertainty amongst both groups. If you look at the general population as well as the 18 to 24-year-olds, about 1/5 of those people who participated in our survey came back with the response that they don't know what a kilojoule means or what it refers to. The other area of interest was looking specifically at the aspect of the average daily intake. So when we asked participants to identify this, about 3/4 of the general population and just under 2/3 of the 18 to 24-year-olds said that they didn't know. And but the levels of don't know did drop over the subsequent data collections, particularly for that 18 to 24-year-old group. The first time we went out and surveyed them, 58% said that they didn't know. The third time that we went out, 45% said that they didn't know. So we're getting a bit of a reduction there. And then conversely, and significantly, we were getting an increase in the number of people who were able to respond correctly. First of all, to respond within a range of 8,000 to 8,999. For the general population, that increased from 8% to 17%. For those who are able to get 8,700 spot on, that increased from 3 to 9%. With the 24-year-olds, well, they were a little bit better to begin with. With regard to the range, they increased significantly from 19% to 35%, and those who could come up with 8,700 increased from 8% to 19%. With respect to what people were purchasing, as I said, as respondents came out from a fast food outlet, we asked them what they purchased for themselves, what they ate for themselves. We then converted that into kilojoules. If we had a respondent where we couldn't get the complete profile from them or the complete nutrient information, they were excluded. That was very few. There was only around about 100. What we saw over the waves with regard to the mean and the medium kilojoules purchased is a decrease over those sampling events. Now, wave 1 and wave 3 were done in the same month and a year apart, so I think they're the key ones that we need to have a look at. And most significantly, in terms of the median kilojoules purchase, we found a reduction of 519 from wave 1 through to wave 3, which is very encouraging. So just collectively then with the fast food and snack sector, our early indicators I feel are very positive. The initiative was very well implemented by industry. We have evidence to show that consumers are noticing information. We're seeing a bit of a shift towards a better understanding of the average daily energy intake, and of course some reduction in the amount of kilojoules purchased was observed. Moving then to supermarkets. Supermarkets were required to comply to the legislation in February last year. Similarly, it's looking at ready-to-eat foods that are available in supermarkets to give you an idea of what that might include. Think of hot chickens, deli salads, some of the hot deli meals, and a range of bakery items. Again, we always had an overarching reference group, but specifically for supermarkets we formed a dedicated supermarkets working group. The statement needed to be displayed, but the energy content also needed to be displayed, but it could be displayed as it related to the whole food item, or it could also be displayed on a unit basis, such as kilojoules per 100 grams of the product on offer. Where it needed to be displayed was on the display cabinet or on the shelf. It had to be at the point of purchase. With supermarkets, in terms of evaluating, we only did the online survey. We looked at 1,000 New South Wales residents using that same panel as before, and 2 data collection points. One in November 2012, that was prior to supermarkets having to comply, and then the other in April 2013. Post-implementation. General take-home messages from supermarkets. As we found with fast food and snack outlets, asking people the question of what do they think kilojoules refer to, around 50% of the respondents were able to respond that it's a measure of energy. We did see a significant increase in those who were able to nominate the correct range for the average daily intake from 10 to 14%. I think quite interestingly in the supermarket setting, when we did ask consumers where do they get their information from, quite typically in that setting for many years, information is available on the packaging, on the wrappers and the boxes, and that were the responses that we were getting. We did see a shift in terms of people indicating that they had noticed information out elsewhere, specifically on a tag on a shelf and a display counter, moving from 5 to 10%. With all of the work that we did with consumers with the online surveys, we try to do a little bit of probing in terms of the actual knowledge via true and false questions. And I do apologise, I know this will be a near impossible one for people to read at the back of the room. But we did ask questions about, are kilojoules only in some foods and drinks? And the ones that I've highlighted down the bottom relate to a statement, the recommended daily intake of salt is 1,000 milligrams and the recommended daily intake of fat is 70 grams. And we see here, nearly 60% up to 70% of don't know responses. So there's a lot of uncertainty out there when it comes to how much is is too much, basically. There's uncertainty amongst the consumers, at least from our research on the online survey. So then finally, getting then to the gaps and to the opportunities. Well, we certainly do have, although we've seen a bit of movement with regard to the understanding of kilojoules, there is some way to go. As I've just talked about, consumers having an understanding of what is an appropriate intake of kilojoules as well as other nutrients is a gap. We did have already one review, and it was a requirement as part of the legislation to review to see if the menu labelling needed to be extended to include salt and fat. And in terms of a gap, I certainly do know that there are probably members of this audience here who do feel that that is a gap that needs to be looked at again sometime in the future. Opportunities. Well, I think we certainly all have an opportunity to promote kilojoules over calories. We went metric many, many years ago, and we managed in many areas to convert from, for example, miles to kilometres. Don't think we've quite managed to shift ourselves from calories to kilojoules, but there is an opportunity to do so. We often get the response that, oh, well, people understand calories a lot better than they do kilojoules. I think perhaps, though, calories is a word that's more familiar to them, and if you were to probe and if you were to scratch, people wouldn't be able to tell you how many calories you're supposed to have a day, or be able to say there's so many calories in that particular product. Those struggles are the same. Great opportunity to leverage and incorporate the key messages into other campaigns, and there are many digital tools that are available to do that. And also the prospect of reformulation, and I certainly know that we have got speakers the rest of the day who will talk about some of the initiatives that are already up and running in that area. So thank you.